Excellent. Welcome to Dialogue. I'm Yang Rui in Beijing. Russian President Vladimir Putin has remained at the center of the world stage throughout 2013. From his diplomatic success in the Middle East to his decision to grant asylum to Edward Snowden, he's continued to attract admiration and provoke anger. But what is his vision for Russia and its place in the world? What are his long-term ambitions for his country?
Russia prevented a military intervention in Syria and gave Edward Snowden a year's asylum. Is a defined Vladimir Putin winner in the standoff with the U.S.? Ukraine faces a choice between the West and the East. Will there be another Orange Revolution to bring down President Viktor Yanukovych? Both China and Russia agree their bilateral relations are at the highest level in history. The country's top leaders met each other 5 times in 2013. What are the driving forces behind their rapport? How will the Russia-China relationship develop? And Russia defends its core values and interests, but doesn't aspire to the title of a superpower. How will that affect relations between Russia and Western countries?
To discuss all these questions, we are pleased to be joined by Mr. Gao Zhikai, Director of China National Association of International Studies, and Mr. Francisco Xixu, columnist from Seoul 24 Hour, and we will also have a satellite interview with Mr. Pavel Felgenhauer, a defense analyst in Russia. Welcome to Dialogue, sir.
Thank you.
Sorry, I have to correct my mistake. It's not the 24 Hour, but what's that?
Well, it's complicated. 24 hours will do fine. Thank you.
But many people are thinking around the clock about the position and influence of Vladimir Putin over the year of 2013. Why do you think the Forbes magazine considers Putin the most powerful person, even pushing President Obama to the second place?
Well, first of all, I think if we look at 2013, apparently Russia as well as President Putin have been punching way above their waistline. Meaning, if you look at the overall size of the Russian economy, the overall mixture of their industrial productivity, for example, Russia is, relatively speaking, a second-tier country. Purely economically speaking. However, Russia has managed to achieve great accomplishments in international diplomacy, and this is very much driven by the fact that President Putin has dazzled the rest of the world with his kind of a leadership, as well as smartness and cleverness, and a little bit of Machiavellian scheming combined with that, to play a much larger role for Russia than what Russia normally would deserve. So in this way, I think President Putin needs to be given a credit, and the rest of the world need to understand Russia better, especially in the geopolitical context of the situation.
Francisco, what do you make of his charisma?
Well, he has charisma, and I would agree with what Victor just said. I mean, Putin managed to carve a new position for Russia. And I think it was because he was clever, but also because of many failures of the American policy, especially in the Middle East. Without those failures, I am afraid Putin wouldn't have made it. And maybe also some missteps in Asia, which gave a new role for Russia with China. Without all of this, he wouldn't have made it.
Thank you very much. Let me cross over to Mr. Pavel Felgenhauer, a defense analyst in Russia. Hello.
Yes, hello.
I'd like to have the Russian perspective on whether President Vladimir Putin has outsmarted his American counterpart, Mr. Obama, on issues such as the chemical weapons in Syria. Or do you think it's largely the mistake that President Obama made that has encouraged Putin to achieve the diplomatic success this year?
Well, it seems obvious from inside Russia and from outside Russia that it was a good year for Putin in many respects, and it was not a very good year for Obama. In the Middle East, in foreign policy, of course, in internal policies, where the ratings of Obama are really right now miserable, though that's not directly connected. It's more with Obamacare, but no matter. With Putin, it's good internally. He has seemingly more or less neutralized the very active opposition that was demonstrating last year. This year, there was much less activity in foreign policy, especially on Syria, where actually the United States and Obama used actually Putin not to get much involved in Syria, because the Obama administration and personally Obama did not want to get involved in Syria. So Russia and the Kremlin and Putin personally gave Obama a way out, and those in Washington that didn't want to get deeper involved in the Syrian mess to not to get involved. Which is good, of course, for everyone. Basically, this is a win-win situation. This increased Russian influence in the Middle East and in foreign policy in general, though it should be taken with a pinch of salt, because, well, the Middle East is important for Russia, but not as important as, say, it was during the Cold War. Russia's real interests lie much closer to home, within the former Soviet borders, within the CIS countries, and there's serious problems right now. The year ends with a very serious political crisis in Ukraine, and that's not good for Putin and the Kremlin at all.
Thank you very much, Victor. President Obama's reluctance to step in militarily may have helped generate headlines for Putin diplomatically. But do you think, as a result, the Russian influence is rising in the Middle East? On the other hand, many observers who follow the developments in the Middle East point out that Russia has basically alienated all other major players, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and Iran, perhaps, other than the diplomatic success over the issue of chemical weapons in Syria.
Well, if we look at the Syrian situation, very apparently and without any doubt, President Putin apparently outsmarted President Obama. And I think whether the United States would use force to resolve the Syrian issue is one thing, but whether the top leader of a superpower, in the case of the United States, could afford to equivocate and send very mixed and very ambivalent messages to the rest of the world. That's another issue, and I think that actually probably is the root cause of the equivocation of the United States in terms of whether to use force or not. And the Americans actually lined up their warships and the missiles in such a way that any strike could happen at any moment's notice. And countries like Saudi Arabia were very much betting on the fact that use of force would be a fait accompli. So I think for the United States, they need to really reflect on this and try to avoid sending very mixed and ambivalent and confused message to the rest of the world. Now, in President Putin's case, apparently he is doing his homework, he's sizing up the situation, he's seizing the best moment to strike, and this time he got very lucky. But I think in a more general way, the fact that Russia has accomplished several major international diplomatic initiatives does not mean that Russia can solve more fundamental issues at home. For example, lack of innovation. For example, if you travel through the vast expanse of Russia, except for Moscow and St. Petersburg, for example, you actually do not see a lot of economic activities in any other cities. And there is a lack of dynamism, and I think most of the country is very much bogged down in the old way of development, which is way outdated already. So I think Russia has major issues to deal with, and a couple of accomplishments on the international diplomatic front will not be sufficient to solve these more fundamental, deep-rooted economic problems that is in urgent need of resolution.
Many people would be very reluctant to compare Russia to a global player. that can never rival the U.S. influence globally, so to speak. However, what do you think of the power of Russian President Putin's own personality? He's obviously a very charming person for those who follow his policies and initiatives. He made bold remarks. He's good at using the media. Is that largely because President Obama has been marginalized because people are getting tired of him?
I think also there is another element, if I may say, in especially Syria, which is the main point, the main springboard for the new Putin era. Putin was very clever to catch a new phase with the new Pope Francis. He very strongly intervened, calling for a peace solution in Syria. And this broke, in a way, the Western Front about what to do in Syria. He called for a day of fast, and even in America, people didn't know what to do. Then Putin intervened. He has been very clever in catching a phase of change and acting upon it, whereas American has been very, very slow on this case. And Putin has managed to be, in a way, more agile, more nimble in this phase. And maybe in this case, the fact that he had a lighter state, a smaller state to take care of.
Don't forget he's good at sumo wrestling.
Yes. And then
let me cross to Pavel. Hello.
Yes.
Hi, Pavel. Why do you think Mr. Putin dared to go as far as to grant a 1-year asylum to Mr. Edward Snowden when the U.S. threatened to do whatever it can to launch the manhunt and bring him to justice?
Well, it was the Snowden affair was not an easy one for the Kremlin. There were different opinions here. Putin himself personally believed that there had some misgivings about the man himself and about his mission. He said so publicly. Though, as far as I know from internal sources here, the Russian FSB security service basically was inclined to work with Snowden and give him an asylum here in Russia, which in the end happened. Of course, fallout from the Snowden revelations have very seriously embarrassed the United States and put a lot of wrenches into the works of the American global diplomacy, which was, of course, not very bad for Russia. Though at the same time you would notice that in his public statements, even recently, last week, Putin was saying that basically such kind of spying activity in the United States are more or less grossly used to fight terrorism, and that this is normal to do such things, and that fighting terrorism is important. So Putin personally was trying to keep a bit outside of the Snowden issue. And maybe in the end, if Snowden decides to move from Russia to another country of his choice, I don't think that the Kremlin is going to be really trying to keep him at any cost. So this is a complicated issue, though right now it plays out against Washington, against Obama, in Putin's favor. And so this is, together with Syria, a very important point achieved by Vladimir Putin and Russia, though Russia didn't do that much with Snowden. It just fell into our lap. But it was lucky, as Putin was lucky. This was a lucky year for him, more or less. If we forget about the crisis in Ukraine that began just when the year was ending.
Francisco, do you think this is a lucky year for Mr. Putin, or do you think it's largely his own initiatives that attracted the media attention?
Well, I think, as Napoleon said, you want lucky generals, not good generals. So whatever the reason is, it was a good year for Putin. Putin managed, as we seem all to agree, to cover all these internal and domestic deficiencies with foreign success, and which is a big achievement. And I guess everybody, all countries will have to cope with this new Russia next year, because we don't know what Putin will be able to play out next year.
Thank you very much. We'll have to leave you there for the moment. We are watching dialogue with Mr. Victor Gao and Mr. Francisco Sisi, as well as Mr. Pavel Falkenhar. We'll be back in a few minutes. Welcome back. President Putin was able to shelve a partnership agreement with the European Union. Not Putin, but the Ukrainian President Viktor Yanukovych was able to shelve a partnership agreement with the European Union. But this sparked huge demonstrations in Kiev. Do you think there will be yet another Orange Revolution? What do you think of the political fate of Mr. Viktor Yanukovych, the current pro-Russian president, according to some of the media reports?
No, I think Ukraine right now is in a dilemma. In one sense, a higher level of economic integration between Ukraine and EU is inevitable. Whether it takes 1 year or it takes 10 years, 50 years, it's going to happen. It's almost irreversible or irresistible. On the other hand, how to handle the relations between Ukraine and Russia is also very, very sensitive. I would say that EU itself need to rethink and reflect on this process. For example, why should they delay the process of admitting Turkey, even though Turkey has repeatedly requested the membership of EU? And why should they just solicit a membership for Ukraine at a time when they have no discussion with Russia for EU membership? Now, if I could advise EU, I would say stretch out your hand to both Russia and Ukraine. You create a situation where both Russia and Ukraine will be welcomed to join EU if they decide to do so. Now, to pull Ukraine into EU and keep Russia completely out will drive the Russians crazy, because the traditional historical linkage between Ukraine and Russia are like making these two countries Siamese twins in a sense. So if you want to develop Ukraine as a member of EU while keeping the door shut against Russia is not a good solution in the macro sense. I would say that EU should also take this opportunity to reflect, and maybe EU can come up with a better strategy in dealing with countries like Russia, Ukraine and Turkey.
You may have underestimated the determination by European Union to elbow Russia out of their sphere of influence following the end of the Cold War, because Russia was rejected in the Boris Yeltsin years. Mr. Kozyrev, the foreign minister in the Yeltsin years, tried in vain to embrace the West, and he was given a cold shoulder. Therefore, despite the political reform which was unsuccessful, Russia failed to be integrated into the western part of Europe. What do you think of the struggle that Putin may have initiated between the European Union and the Euro-Asian Custom Union, which I'm afraid is being used by Moscow as a hedge against the growing influence of the European Union? And also President Putin wants very much to integrate the heavyweight countries of Commonwealth of Independence, legacy of the Soviet era, like Ukraine and Georgia, like Belarus, into this framework, the Euro-Asian Union custom.
I think we have maybe to separate two issues. One is Russia and Ukraine, and the other one is Europe and Euro area and Ukraine. First, I would say on the Euro area, Turkey is now very happy it didn't join the Euro area, because otherwise it would be in a lot of trouble. The fact that now Turkey is out of the Euro and the EU and doesn't want to join the EU anymore, I mean, is not eager about this union because of the Euro crisis, is casting a new shadow and also a new light, if you want, on all Europe and European strategies. I think that for Europe, what is essential is to keep Ukraine as a buffer state between Europe, so between Poland, in fact, and Russia. You don't want Russia to come too close to Poland, because that would scare the Polish and the Germans, but you don't want also to go too close to Russia, I mean, getting Ukraine into this. And so, as for Europe, this is somehow an unstable solution which meets all needs. For Russia, I think Russia wants to get Ukraine too close, but I think this is against the best Russian interests, because if he gets Ukraine too close to his heart, although Putin seems to be keen on this, may create a lot of troubles in the future.
Thank you very much. Pavel, an embattled Moscow and Ankara, which has been left disoriented and quite disappointed, both turn to the east to attract the Chinese investment, either in the area of energy extraction or arms deals like missiles. Now, what do you think of the relationship? First of all, what do you think of the relationship between Beijing and Moscow when Moscow was given the cold shoulder by the European Union? And particularly when you look at the ongoing struggles to fight for the Ukraine presence in either the Eurasian Customs Union or the European Union.
Well, the Ukrainian issue right now is the most important issue for Russia internally and in foreign policy. And this is way more important than just economic suggestions. This is a geopolitical and political problem, and this will influence Russian internal policy and Russian foreign policy, and also concerning foreign policy in Asia and concerning China. Because the Ukrainian crisis will have a very serious fallout. No matter in which direction it goes in the end, who wins in the internal fight in Kiev, where the city is basically divided and the ruling president controls a smaller part of the city, actually only really the government quarters, and the majority of the population of Kiev is actually supporting a united opposition that wants to oust him and wants to move Ukraine towards the west. But of course, maybe Yanukovych with Russian help will in the end prevail, but this is going to have a very serious damaging effect on Russian, European, Russian, Western relations, because for Europe, reintegrated Russia with Ukraine and with Kazakhstan and Belarus is a kind of reincarnation of the Soviet Union that Europe does not want. So as Russia and Western relations suffer, Russia is going to, of course, increasingly turn towards China as a partner and towards the Asia-Pacific region. So this is going to be a very important trend in the coming year. Ukraine is going to decide and have a fallout effect on all of world politics, and especially on Russian foreign policy in the world.
These days, people are looking at the alleged power struggle between Russia and China in Central Asia, particularly following the military drawdown of the U.S. from Iraq and Afghanistan. Now, do you think this issue has been blown out of proportion? What do you think of the initiative of Moscow in enhancing its Soviet legacy in the backyard of the Soviet Empire in Central Asia?
Central Asia is, of course, a very serious issue too, right? Especially since, as the United States is winding down its major presence in Afghanistan and maybe moving out of the region and fully, it's not clear, but if the present Afghan President Karzai continues not to sign the agreement, there are fractions in Washington, especially in the Pentagon, that could use that as a pretext to just simply leave in essence, leave Central Asia to its own fate and move out. And that will leave Russia and China and the local governments in a very precarious situation. No one really likes the Americans that much, but even right now the Russian defense minister says it's not very good that they're leaving so early because this may destabilize the region. And this region is essentially important to Russia, it's important to China, it's a source of course, energy and natural gas and oil, but it's also
particularly following the announcement by Mr. Xi Jinping to establish the new Silk Route in Central Asia that will link China with Central Asia, the Middle East, and perhaps Central and Eastern Europe. Thank you very much, Pavel, for being with us. The last question is very much about the latest announcement by Mr. Putin to give a general pardon to Khodorkovsky, the former oil tycoon who was put behind the bars for alleged evasion of tax. What do you think of the attempt by Putin to repair the image of Russia and to reconstruct the soft power of this country? Recently, he also called for a return to the traditional values.
Well, I think this is a smart move because the oil tycoon's prison term is going to be finished next year. So I think by doing this is more symbolic than substantive. And also I think the former foreign minister of Germany, Mr. Genser, played a very important role in mediating for the release of the former Russian tycoon. So I think it's also a sign and good gesture of goodwill to the Germans. So I think President Putin, both domestically as well as internationally, has demonstrated a lot of skills and mastering the nuances and the sensitivities of this issue, and has emerged again and again as a winner. So he is a guy to be seriously watched about, and I think we may expect more surprises from President Putin in the coming years.
Thank you very much. With that, we come to the end of this edition of Dialogue with Mr. Victor Gao, Mr. Francisco Xixi, and Pavel Belapov, the Russian expert on defense issues. We'll see you next time. Goodbye.